Hello and welcome to everyone and coming to this amazing event on the role of hydrogen in the transition to net zero. My name is Dan Dorner. I'm head of the Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat and I will be your moderator for the duration of today's event. We have an excellent agenda lined up for you today and my deepest thanks and congratulations to both the International Energy Agency and to Japan's Ministry of Energy, Trade and Industry for organising, frankly, what is an absolutely stellar cast list. And of course, for those of you at home, we're coming to you live from the lovely Japan Pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow. Now, our speakers today and the countries, institutions and organisations that they represent have been, are, and I'm sure will continue to be, at the very centre of global action to grow a new global clean energy economy. And this new hydrogen economy is quickly moving, as we all know, from theory to practice, vision to reality, from ambition to action. And when, in the future, they come to write the history of this, they will see that the people joining us today will all feature very heavily for their positive leadership in making it a reality. Now, we see a positive frenzy of activity today, much of which can find its genesis in, for example, the Hydrogen Energy Ministerial, our own Clean Energy Ministerial's Hydrogen Initiative, the IEA's world-leading Future of Hydrogen report and Global Hydrogen Review, the amazing work of the Hydrogen Council and of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy. And perhaps most importantly, the fact that this has all been called for, sponsored by, digested and acted upon in many cases in the policy actions taken by the leading governments themselves. And we're honoured today to have ministers from Chile, and very shortly he will be joining us, Minister Wilkinson from Canada, as well as senior representatives from Japan and the United States. So thank you to everyone in advance for participating in today's session. It really is amazing. Now, my most important role in this whole event today is to be brief. They are going to do all the talking. They are going to tell you all of the interesting things. And so I hope and presume that all of our audience have seen the agenda for the meeting today, and I won't repeat it. And so without further ado, let me just move on into the high-level remarks section of today's event for today's keynote speeches. And we're very lucky to be joined by His Excellency Minister Juan Carlos Llobet, Minister of Energy and Mining in Chile, as well as the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Dr. Fatih Birol, who I was very pleased to see recently had his decades of excellent work recognized by Time magazine when they recognized him as one of the 100 most influential people. Very well deserved. And very shortly we'll also be joined by Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, who actually is very newly appointed in his role, but also not new to clean energy. And it'll be great to congratulate him on his appointment when he arrives with us today. So I will ask all of our speakers in this section to try and keep your remarks to around 8 minutes. And also do please forgive me in advance if I ever dare to interrupt. I promise I'm only doing so to be fair to the other speakers today. But I know that everyone here and everyone at home around the world is very, very keen to hear what you have to say. So with that, it is now my great pleasure to hand over to not just a visionary energy leader for Chile and Latin America, but also an excellent host of the recent 12th Clean Energy Ministerial meeting, to which he has my undying gratitude. Minister Llobet, please, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Here? No, can you hear me? Yeah. Can I speak from here for people watching live? Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. It is a great pleasure to share the scene with Fatih Birol. What a great leader and what a great job the agency is doing on the energy transition. I will try to do briefly in 5 minutes, tell you the basics of green hydrogen, why I think it's so important, and briefly what we are doing from Chile to try to push this agenda forward. So I like to think of green hydrogen as the missing link of the energy transition. If you were to explain to a little boy what the world needs to do to be carbon neutral by 2050, this is what I suggest you tell him or her. We need to clean the way in which we produce electricity, replacing coal, natural gas, diesel, and produce electricity with renewables, solar PV, wind, and others. Step one. And then step two, use that electricity to replace fossil fuels in everything we do. Use cheap electricity and clean electricity in transportation through electromobility. Use it for heating and cooling our houses and offices. And then use it in our industries and so on. That plan sounds great, but it has one problem. There are certain sectors of our economies that are very hard to electrify. Sectors in which the direct use of electricity doesn't work that well. In those segments, what we will be using is green hydrogen. We will use green hydrogen to produce steel and cement. We will use clean hydrogen for heavy-duty transportation, for shipping, aviation, and other sectors, right? So that's why I say it's the missing link to that very simple plan. Some people estimate that by 2050, between 10 and up to 20% of global energy demand will be supplied by green hydrogen and its derivatives, green ammonia, sync fuels, and others, right? Now, between 50 and 80% of the cost of producing green hydrogen is the cost of electricity, right? For hydrogen to be green, you have to use 100% renewable electricity, right? It's the biggest part of the cost. Now, so the countries that are able to produce renewable electricity at the lowest price are in the best position to produce cheap green hydrogen, right? And Chile has, I think, the best natural resources to produce clean electricity, right? Capacity factors in the Atacama Desert in the north can be up to 37%. That's highest than anywhere in the planet. And in Magallanes in the south, onshore wind has capacity factors of over 70%, right? So our renewable resources to produce clean electricity and therefore green hydrogen are very good quality, but they are also very abundant. We have identified resources to build 80 times the capacity our grid currently has. So we need to find ways to harvest those resources, to use them locally, but then to share them with the world. And green hydrogen and its derivatives are the best way to do that, right? So that's why last year we launched our national green hydrogen strategy. We set ourselves very ambitious and clear goals to produce the cheapest green hydrogen in the planet by 2030, to have 5 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity under development by 2025, to be one of the top 3 exporters of green hydrogen by 2040. And we're making very good progress. When we launched our strategy, we had 20 projects being developed in Chile. Now we have 60. The number has tripled in just 1 year. We're seeing a lot of traction, a lot of interest around this industry. We have the natural resources, we have a stable business environment, we have free trade agreements with more than 90% of the world's GDP, which is very useful to export those resources to the world. We made the numbers, and our cost of production is so low that it more than compensates the cost of logistics, so we can be competitive even in distant markets like Japan, for example, where, by the way, I will be traveling this next week to talk about green hydrogen. But to make this happen, we need renewable resources, the regulatory environment, but also we need collaboration. We need off-takers, we need technology providers, we need financing. So we need many players to come down to Chile, invest in our country, and help us make this a reality. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Minister Jobé. I'm just waiting for the sound to come back on. Can they hear me? Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Wonderful, Mr. Jobé. I think an excellent point there that you've got the most amazing resources and the potential, but you also need the clear plans, clear goals, vision, strategy to make it a reality and to ensure that you have the other partners and the collaboration to really bring all of the pieces together. And Chile really is an excellent example of that, an excellent case study for others to follow. Thank you. And with that, let me turn to our second speaker, Dr. Fatih Birol, the Executive Director of the IEA. Please, Dr. Birol, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's okay. Shall I go here? Okay.
No, you're okay. I can hear you.
Shall I go here or is it okay? Here?
They can hear you.
You have to decide.
can hear
Okay, I sit like that, in between. Okay. So, dear colleagues, very many thanks to Japan and the SAM to organize, Clean Energy Ministry organize this meeting. Mr. Minister, thank you very much. Always I listen to you, I got inspired, learn a lot of things, this time on the green hydrogen. So I have 5 messages, each 1 minute. The first is in general. Mr. Dan Dorner, the head of the SAM's secretariat, mentioned we make a lot of studies on energy, future, today, past. I see one general message coming from there. Very clear. A clean global energy economy is emerging. This is coming. Nobody can stop it. It can be accelerated, but it is impossible to stop. Solar, wind, electric cars, hydrogen, energy efficiency, digitalization, it is coming very strongly across the world. It is not only in Europe, not in North America, but also in China and in India, everywhere around the world. A clean global energy market is emerging. This is number one. Within this, hydrogen has a clear, important role, for sure. Now, I will say a few things. Among those, I would welcome the Canadian minister just entering, and about to sit, Mr. Minister, welcome to the meeting. But I would like to just give a word of caution. When I look at the energy debate around the world today, I have never seen so many years any single energy option which is loved by everybody. Everybody loves hydrogen. But sometimes too much love is not very good as well. So therefore, hydrogen is not the single solution to our problems. It is part of the solution. I want to make it clear. Don't be upset at me, but this is part of the solution. It is not the only solution. We are not going to see a world, I believe, which is only dominated by hydrogen. This is the. Then let me go to the third point. In the year 2019, then Prime Minister Abe of Japan asked the International Energy Agency, when Japan was hosting the G20, to make a landmark report, the first report ever on hydrogen, the future of hydrogen. And my friend, Director General Shinichi Kihara would remember, it was the first ever report talking about the cost, technology, and the implications. And at that time, 2019, only 2 years ago, there were only 3 countries in the world which had a hydrogen strategy. Today, 17 countries around the world which has a full national hydrogen strategy, Chile being one of them and the front runners. And there are still 20 other countries who are, with some of them we are working very closely together, building a national hydrogen strategy. It is coming very strongly, I should tell you that. There is a lot of enthusiasm. Last 2 remarks before passing the floor to our chair, Mr. Dan Dorner. Now, I see that there is a lot of discussion, rightly so, about international hydrogen trade. Discussions options. I see a lot of world maps coming up again with lots of arrows and so on. Even the foreign ministries of some countries are building divisions. I saw in one of the countries the geopolitics of hydrogen trade. These are all very good. But I would like one thing, if a trade to happen, we need to know, the investors, companies need to know, what are the rules of the game. We don't know yet. And I want to put at least one question here. What is the definition of low carbon hydrogen? What is in, what is out? We have to be clear before we start to make this trade arrows and all of these things. Is natural gas with carbon capture and storage, is it part of the low carbon? In my view, if it is a real carbon capture work with the gas and with the methane, definitely, it's very important. If the methane is minimized, if not nullified, it can well be qualified. Together with, of course, the main engine being the green hydrogen. So what I want is my fourth point is the rules of the game for international hydrogen trade. We don't know yet. I think we have to start from there. They say if you want to button up your shirt, if you make the first one wrong, everything goes down wrong. So the first button is what are the rules of the game for international hydrogen trade. And the fifth one. So we talk about the technologies, green, not green, blue, and so on. But for me, the biggest question is, how are we going to build a demand? Where is the demand? There is a real job for the governments to build a hydrogen demand. How will it happen? Procurement by the governments, mandates, different ways of the government incentives here. There is a role for governments to build a demand so that we can bring the cost down. Without this demand built, only looking at the supply side, maybe, in my view, not be so clever. So let's look at the demand, find ways with the auctions, with the procurements from the government side, let's bring the demand up. Anyways, I said in the beginning, everybody loves hydrogen, and the International Energy Agency is also one of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Birol, for such powerful and insightful remarks as ever. I'm always reassured when I hear you speak that you and your excellent team perform the critical role of being the chief energy advisor to the world, and you're giving the best advice possible. Thank you for that. And it's a pleasure to welcome the Minister for Natural Resources from Canada, Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you've got a very busy schedule today. And in particular to you, sir, congratulations on your new appointment. I know it's new into the role. I'm sure you must have come into the office and they immediately put a plane ticket in your hand to Glasgow. Also, thank you for setting off my heart rate monitor, wondering quite if I was going to get you in time. So my heart is still ticking and working quite well. But with that, thank you once again and congratulations. Please, over to you, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. My apologies for being late. I was in a round table and Prince Charles showed up, and just as I was about to leave, I didn't feel like as soon as the prince sat down, I could get up and walk away. So my apologies for that. And yes, I'm new to the role of natural resources, but for the past 2 years, I was Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change. And so had a fairly significant role in putting together Canada's climate plan, which certainly includes a significant focus on hydrogen. I should maybe start by saying I entered politics 6 years ago from running clean tech companies, and one of the companies I ran was in the hydrogen space. In fact, Darryl Wilson, who's here, we worked together on a number of things when he was running a hydrogen-related company. And I was in that space long enough ago to remember the promise that people felt existed way back in the early years of this century. I was working alongside Ballard Power Systems and Daimler Chrysler on the launch of 1 million fuel cell vehicles in 2006. Now that didn't happen, and people were very excited about hydrogen, but they were excited about it in advance of the applications that Fatih talked about needing to be there in terms of driving demand and the technology being ready for prime time. I think what's changed is that the urgency of the climate issue has really pushed us to push the boundaries of the technology with respect to some of the applications that we're targeting. And it's also allowed us to push the boundaries on the hydrogen generation technology, particularly as it relates to being able to address the carbon issue. In Canada, hydrogen we see as an important path forward with respect to its utilization as an energy carrier in a range of applications, including heavy-duty transportation, but power generation and storage and a whole bunch of other things. And we actually see it potentially as an export opportunity as you move through the phase with liquid natural gas all the way to hydrogen, as I know our friends in Chile do. We are focused on pathways that are, I like to get away from green, blue, and turquoise. We're focused on low carbon hydrogen and eventually zero carbon hydrogen. And so that's simpler in the context of green hydrogen, obviously. But green hydrogen at this stage is still quite expensive relative to other options, and we need to work on that. Of course, part of that is about driving down the cost of electrolyzers, but part of it is just fundamentally getting to low-cost electricity. But blue hydrogen, we've made a lot of advances such that new capture technologies can capture up to 95% of the carbon. And there's emerging technologies, including a company in Canada that looks to drop the carbon out in solid form rather than actually releasing it as a gas. So there's a lot of work that's going on that says that we're getting a handle on the production of low carbon hydrogen. We're making steps forward with respect to applications that are going to actually drive demand. But Fatih is exactly right, that the government is going to have to play a role in stimulating some of those markets in the same way that we've done with electric vehicles. You know, where we have built out the refueling infrastructure, where we have provided subsidies for people to buy cars to try to buy down the gap in terms of the price. Obviously, that we don't see that continuing forever. As production ramps up, the costs will come down. But we will have to do the same thing with respect to hydrogen, and we will have to think about selectively the applications on which we are going to be primarily focused. We have been working through the Clean Energy Ministerial on what we've called the Hydrogen Initiative, and there are a range of different countries that are involved in that, all working to actually try to figure out the pathways through which we actually get to the place where we are utilizing hydrogen and we are not combusting fossil fuels as we go forward. And certainly from an economic perspective, for many countries, Chile, Canada, the United States, and many countries in the European Union, this is not only a climate imperative in terms of the reduction of carbon, but it is an economic imperative. There are enormous economic opportunities for countries that actually are thoughtful and that get into this game early to ensure that you are seizing those economic opportunities. That is particularly important in countries, I would say, like Canada, where we are going to have large numbers of people who work in the traditional oil and gas space that we're going to need to transition to new forms of employment. And so that is something that we are thinking about each and every day as we move through this transition that will happen over the coming decades.
Thank you so much, Minister Wilkinson, and it's really great to have you coming into this new role with such a depth and range of expertise to bring into it, which means you can really hit the ground running, and absolutely right and great to hear your remarks on the transitional elements and the economic opportunities that come into this piece too. Look, just want to say thank you once again to all of our keynote speakers before we move into the next part of today's session. Thank you so much, Minister Jobé. Thank you so much, Minister Wilkinson. Thank you so much, Dr. Barol. Please give them another round of applause. And as I let them free from the stage, they've got very busy agendas during COP26, and I hope you have a range of productive meetings. We'll move into the next part of today's session. So with thanking them, and we'll move in, I'd like to introduce back to the stage Dr. Jose Bermudez from the International Energy Agency, senior energy analyst there, who's actually one of the key authors of many of those key reports that we've been talking about already on hydrogen including the recently published Global Hydrogen Review. So firstly, thank you, Jose, to you and all of your colleagues for all of that excellent insight that you've been providing for the world to go in the right direction when it comes to developing this hydrogen economy. And with that, let me hand over to you for a scene-setting presentation. Thank you.
Sorry, there you go. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Dan, first of all, for the introduction. Really pleased to be here today and to have the opportunity of giving everybody a view of the findings that we have found in this Global Hydrogen Review that we launched for the first time this year, and the recommendations that we have put forward for helping industry and governments to tap into the opportunity that hydrogen offers in the clean energy transition. Let me just set the scene about why hydrogen and how we are moving from this momentum to implementation phase that we have been hearing from our keynote speakers. As Dr. Birol mentioned, in 2019, as a request from the Japan government and the G20 presidency, we prepared our landmark report, The Future of Hydrogen. At the time that we published this report, we found an increasing momentum behind hydrogen, but there were still some doubts whether the time for hydrogen had really arrived. 2 years later, I think it's safe to argue that we are really moving from that momentum phase to an implementation phase. There is now real on-the-ground action that is happening. And let me give you 3 indicators. Some of them Dr. Birol has already flagged, which is one of the key findings. 2 years ago, there were only 3 countries, which were our host, Japan, Korea, and France, the only 3 countries that had strategies in place for the use of hydrogen. Today, there are 17 governments that have already adopted a hydrogen strategy, and more than 20 governments that we are aware of have publicly announced that they are working on developing their strategies. Industry is responding for this call for action with an impressive appetite for investment. According to the Hydrogen Council, from now till 2030, there is a plan for hydrogen-related projects that account for more than $500 billion. And finally, international cooperation is mounting. There is a growing number of bilateral and multilateral agreements between governments and industrial stakeholders, and there are several major international initiatives, and Dan is a good witness of that, that have appeared with the intention of deploying faster hydrogen technologies. It is difficult to pin down which are the exact reasons that are creating this progress, but the fact that hydrogen can play a significant role in decreasing CO2 emissions, and the fact that there is a growing number of governments and companies that are adopting net zero pledges is clearly one of the key drivers. But as always, when we speak about clean energy technologies, there are questions still open. Is this progress fast enough? That is going into the right direction? And this is the type of questions that we are going to try to respond annually with our Global Hydrogen Review. To start off, let me remind you that hydrogen is already a global major business. So according to our last estimate, more than 90 million tons of hydrogen were produced and used in 2020 around the world. Most of them used in traditional applications as a feedstock in the chemical industry and in refining. There is a slow entry into new applications, most of it currently confined only to road transport, that today still account just 0.02% of global hydrogen demand. However, as we showed in our Net-Zero Emissions report by 2050 that we released in May, hydrogen should start being used in new sectors to play the role that it can really play as a key enabler of the clean energy transition. In our net zero emissions by 2050 scenario, the demand for hydrogen should grow 6-fold by 2050, and its use should expand to new sectors such as long-distance transport and new heavy industrial applications, shipping, aviation, or power generation as a way of increasing the share of renewables that we can integrate in the grid and to provide seasonal storage. By 2050, hydrogen and hydrogen-derived fuels should meet 10% of total final energy consumption, growing from less than 0.1% today. We have to be clear here as well in that hydrogen is not a silver bullet. It is just one piece more of the puzzle that we need to put together to to make sure that we achieve net zero emissions, along with other key enablers of decarbonization, such as energy efficiency, renewables, direct electrification, carbon capture and storage, sustainable bioenergy, and many others. But this is where we should be heading, but where are we headed? Our analysis of current policies and projects already announced suggests that hydrogen demand is growing, but most of this growth comes basically from existing uses. We think that the demand for refining can grow in the next decade by 2030 due to the recovery of the activity in the sector that has been lost during the pandemic. In the chemical sector, we also expect a significant increase of demand for drivers like the growing need for ammonia for the use in fertilizer, accompanying the growth in population. And in the iron and steel industry, we also expect an increase in demand on hydrogen, basically because we will need more steel to develop new infrastructure, particularly in emerging economies. However, we already see some introduction of hydrogen in new uses. We have seen a growing market of the fuel cell electric vehicles. In the last 3 years, it has grown sixfold, and there are a significant number of projects expecting to demonstrate the use of hydrogen in trucks, in shipping, in rail, and in aviation, both in the form of hydrogen and hydrogen-derived fuels. In addition, concretely this year, we have 3 major announcements from the industrial sector. The first demonstration for producing carbon-free steel using low-carbon hydrogen started operating in Sweden. There is a demonstration project in Japan for co-firing 20% of ammonia in a 1 gigawatt unit coal plant that has also started this year. And in Spain, there is the first demonstration of variable renewable electricity to produce hydrogen, to produce itself ammonia for the fertilizer industry that is expected to start operating at the end of this year. These are all good developments, but they fall very short from what we need to put in place to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. However, there is more to come. When we take a look at the recent announcements and net zero pledges made by governments, we think that implementing and what they mean for hydrogen demand, we need that implementing these pledges will mean that demand for hydrogen by 2030 can grow up to 120 megatons. And what is more important, 10% will come from new uses. Obviously, this requires a step change in demand creation compared to the current trend, but governments have already started to announce policies that can support these demands, like auctions, carbon contracts for difference, quotas, mandates, or public procurement requirements. Most of these actions are not in place yet, but their widespread and quick enactment can help in unlocking these demands. This is the demand side of the equation, but we also have a supply side of the equation. Today, hydrogen is not yet the clean energy vector that it needs to be to play its role in the clean energy transition. Last year, the vast majority of the production of hydrogen was done with unabated fossil fuels, resulting in around 900 million tons of CO2 released. This is equivalent to the emissions of Indonesia and the United Kingdom combined. The production of low-carbon hydrogen is very limited, less than 1 megaton per year, most of it coming from the use of fossil fuels with carbon capture, utilization and storage, and with a little contribution from renewable-based electrolysis. However, the good news is that the announcements of projects to produce low-carbon hydrogen is growing very fast, and we can see that the pipeline, if the pipeline of projects that we have today available is realized by 2030, we could be producing 17 million tons of low-carbon hydrogen by then. A significant fraction of these projects are at very advanced stages of development, but some of them are still at very early stages, and there is some uncertainty on the numbers that we can reach by 2030. When we take a look at the different technologies to be used, we can see that there is quite an even share between the projects aiming to produce hydrogen through electrolysis and the projects aiming to produce hydrogen with fossil fuels and carbon capture, utilization and storage. However, there are some significant regional differences. On the electrolysis side, Europe is today the largest market and is expected to remain so in the short term, although other regions like Australia have become a hotspot for the development of electrolysis-based projects. Australia has a strong potential to produce low-carbon, cheap hydrogen that can be exported to high-demand sectors in Southeast Asia, such as Japan and Korea. Also, Latin America and the Middle East are expected to develop significant capacities for producing hydrogen for electrolysis, also with the objective of exporting basically hydrogen and ammonia. China had a slow start in the development of electrolysis capacities, but today's announcements are growing very fast, and most of them actually come from this year. This somehow hints what has happened with solar PV in China. When we look at the production of hydrogen with fossil fuels and carbon capture, utilization and storage, we see that today Canada and the US account for 80% of global capacity. This capacity is expected to increase by 2030, although their share of the global capacity will probably decrease due to the developments in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe, where the United Kingdom and the Netherlands account for a vast majority of the projects currently on the pipeline. This increase in the production of low-carbon hydrogen will be important also to drive down cost, which is today the biggest barrier for its adoption. Today, producing hydrogen from unabated fossil fuels, but concretely from natural gas, depending on the gas prices, ranges between $0.5 and $1.7 per kilogram. Using CO2 capture to decrease the emissions from these production assets means that the cost increases to $1 to $2 per kilogram, and using renewable electricity ranges between $3 and $8 per kilogram. However, technology development, technology deployment, innovation, and the implementation of policies to support the production of low-carbon hydrogen will likely to decrease the cost of renewable-based hydrogen, and of course the decrease on the renewable electricity cost that we have witnessed recently. The question is by how much and how fast. And we think that our net zero scenario is a good proxy for what can happen in an ambitious policy framework. In our net zero emissions scenario, by 2030, the cost of renewable hydrogen drops to $1.3 per kilogram in those regions with excellent resources, and up to $3.5 in the rest of the world. This can make hydrogen from renewable resources competitive with hydrogen from fossils and carbon capture, utilization and storage, and even competitive with unabated fossil generation in those regions with excellent resources. This decrease in low-carbon hydrogen is also critical to the creation of a global hydrogen trade. This can help countries that cannot meet their home demands, the domestic demands, with low-carbon hydrogen to import low-carbon hydrogen or hydrogen-based fuels from other regions, but can also offer an export opportunity to these regions with excellent renewable resources or excellent geological CO2 storage. Some countries are already exploring this opportunity with developments spearheaded by our host today, Japan. Let me give you 3 examples of very recent achievements from Japan in their collaboration. In 2020, there was the first shipment of a liquid organic hydrogen carrier between Brunei and Japan. Also in 2020, for the first time, 40 tons of ammonia produced with fossil fuels and carbon capture, utilization and storage were transported from Saudi Arabia to Japan to be used as a fuel. And finally, the first shipment of liquefied hydrogen is expected to happen between Australia and Japan before March 2022. Today, there are more than 60 projects that have been announced with expecting to export hydrogen, 17 of which are already under development. These are heavily concentrated in the Pacific region, but we have already seen some developments in Europe, in Latin America, and in the north of Africa. Finally, let me give you some of the recommendations that we have put forward in this global hydrogen review, which they don't basically differ from those that we announced for the Future of Hydrogen report, but in this case we think that there is a need to put some additional focus on some key areas. There is a need to keep developing these national strategies and roadmaps about the role of hydrogen in the energy system. And these strategies and roadmaps should contain clear targets for the deployment of low-carbon hydrogen production and for stimulating demand. This will create confidence in stakeholders, in investors, and will accelerate deployment. We need to put in place incentives that can help us to use low-carbon hydrogen to displace unabated fossil fuels. As we showed, creation of demand is lagging behind what is needed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. There are already some actions. Some countries have already adopted, for example, carbon pricing, which is helping to close the gap between the production of low-carbon hydrogen and the conventional unabated fossil routes. But this needs to be accompanied by other actions and quick actions, things like auctions, things like carbon contracts for difference, things like mandates, quotas, and public procurement, hydrogen-specific public procurement. This can help industry to de-risk investments. There is a need to mobilize investments in production assets, in infrastructure for hydrogen, and in factories for the production of hydrogen technologies. A policy framework that can stimulate demand will be able to prompt certain investment on these areas, but not enough to make the development fast enough to cope with what is needed on the clean energy transition. The use of tailor-made support for shovel-ready and flagship projects can help us in creating that production and those assets that in the future other projects can benefit from. There is a need to provide a strong innovation support to ensure that critical hydrogen technologies reach commercialization soon. We like to say that the story of the success of hydrogen will be a story about innovation, which is critical to drive down the cost of hydrogen technologies. We need to make sure that those technologies are available soon so they are ready to deliver CO2 emission savings at scale by 2030. Finally, and I will quote again Dr. Birol, there is a need to establish appropriate certification, standardization schemes, and adapt regulatory schemes. This is critical in certain areas to make the rules of the game clear. And for example, we want to put the spotlight on the need of an international agreement on how the carbon footprint for hydrogen production is measured to make sure that hydrogen production is truly low carbon. It can really help on developing a low carbon hydrogen market. This is all on my side. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, brilliant, Jose. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. And let me also just say, he's really given you the edited highlights of what is a very deep and rich report. So for those of you that haven't already seen the IEA's Global Hydrogen Review, I do recommend go to the IEA website and download it. It is free. I hope I'm not doing you out of any royalties by saying that. And there's much more to be seen in there too. But thank you very much, Jose. So that's also an excellent framing for the panel discussion that we're now going to move into. Hybrid panel, the opportunities and challenges to accelerate the adoption of low-carbon hydrogen as a clean energy vector. So let me start by inviting to the physical stage Mr. Shinichi Kahara, Deputy Director General for Technology and Environment at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. Welcome, Mr. Kahara. And also, please, Mr. Darrell Wilson, Executive Director of the Hydrogen Council. It's great to have you both here with us. Thank you very much for joining me on the stage. And on the virtual stage, let me also introduce, I can see there brilliantly, Dr. Sunita Satyapal, Director of the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office in the Department of Energy of the United States. It's great to see you there, Sunita. And Dr. Noé van Holst, Chair of the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy. And again, it's really great to see you there as well, Noé. So there we go. We've got an excellent panel of speakers. Once again, as I said a bit earlier, we really are spoilt with the speakers we've got today. A dream team of global hydrogen expertise, a high-powered hydrogen panel to share their insights today, both physically and virtually. So I'm going to start with a round of interventions from each of our speakers in turn, and then we'll go into some follow-up questions and discussion. So with that, let me start by inviting Mr. Kahara. Please, Shinichi, over to you. Thank you. Please.
Presentation.
Yes, yes, you can hear me. Thank you very much. So, good evening and welcome to the Japan Pavilion. Thank you for coming today. I'm Shinichi Kihara. I'm the DDG for Environment Policy of Minister of Economy Trade in Japan. I express my appreciation to the IEA for co-hosting this event, and Mr. Dan Dona, who was my colleague in the IEA when I worked there 10 years ago, and also the two ministers from Chile and Canada for their excellent remarks. So, as we all know, we're currently facing the challenge of climate change and the resulting increase in natural disasters. And hydrogen is one of the key innovations to overcome these challenges. And today, I would like to talk about Japan's vision and actions towards hydrogen-based economy. So, why hydrogen? Japan's energy policy is based on the 3E plus S principle. It refers to the simultaneous achievement of energy security, economic efficiency, environment, and safety. And hydrogen can solve both the environmental and energy security issues and can also contribute to strengthening industrial competitiveness. And today, many countries and regions are strengthening their hydrogen-related initiatives and policies. And as introduced, Japan in 2017 launched the world's first national strategy on hydrogen, the Basic Hydrogen Strategy, setting visions towards the hydrogen society and also laying out the future cost targets and numerical targets and goals. And at the end of the last year, we have positioned hydrogen as one of the priority areas in the green growth strategy. We aim to expand the amount of hydrogen introduction and reduce the cost of supply. And furthermore, 2 weeks ago, the Japanese government approved the 6th Basic Energy Plan, which includes the drastic strengthening of the efforts to realize the hydrogen society. And we set two numerical targets for building the hydrogen society. One is reducing the cost. Our goal is to reduce from $10 per kilogram today to $3 by 2030 and to $2 by 2050. And two is increase the market volume. We expect domestic demand for hydrogen will reach 3 million tons by 2030 and 20 million tons by 2050. And this is 100,000-fold of the volume today. And towards this goal, our government will facilitate building up entire hydrogen system, including the demand side, production side, and also the infrastructure and transportation part. And on demand utilization side, in addition to expand the fuel cell vehicles, we will see drastic use of hydrogen in power generation and industry. On the production side, reducing the cost by scaling up facilities and accelerating R&D for effective, efficient hydrogen production is very important. And building the hydrogen supply chain domestically and internationally and coordinating relevant regulations and standards needs to be done. And I will showcase major Japanese hydrogen projects and initiatives ongoing today. In terms of mobility, there are around 160 hydrogen stations, and some of them are for fuel cell buses. We are conducting R&D and demonstrations to expand the application of fuel cells in mobility. Regarding regional initiatives, there's demonstration project of Fukushima Hydrogen Energy Research Field, and there's the world's largest electrolyzer project ongoing. And we are also supporting further development of water electrolysis technology through the Green Innovation Fund. And in addition, hydrogen hubs have been formed in industrial regions such as Kansai and Chubu regions. That's where all the automobile makers are. In order to reduce the cost of hydrogen supply, we are conducting demonstrations to establish international hydrogen supply chains. I think IEA just introduced, we have this Brunei to Japan project coming from the Brunei natural gas. And also from Australia to Japan, we produce hydrogen from Australian lignite, inject the CO2 in Australia and ship the hydrogen to Japan with the first hydrogen shipping tanker in the world. As for hydrogen power generation technology, this is a game changer technology. There's a 30% hydrogen gas turbine co-firing, blend firing project underway. And we already have the technology. And we envision by 2025, there's a project in Netherlands. We have 100% hydrogen thermal plant plan for 440 megawatt thermal plant. And in 2009, Japan became the first country in the world to start selling household fuel cells. It's called NFARM, and cumulative total of more than 400,000 units have been installed, including my apartment. In Japan, with limited potential for natural resources, including renewables, we expect in the future we will import large volume of hydrogen from overseas. This is a great map coming from the Canadian hydrogen strategy. So it says carbon-free exporter map, but it's an importer map for Japan. Countries in dark blue, like Japan and Europe, will become big importer of hydrogen. And US, Canada, Australia, Middle East, and other regions are potential significant hydrogen suppliers. So just like LNG, we need to design and build a global hydrogen supply chain that will bring value to all countries. Since hydrogen is a topic of growing interest worldwide, Japan has taken the lead in promoting international cooperation on hydrogen. Japan has hosted the hydrogen ministerial meeting for 4 times since 2018. And in the 4th conference early last month, 30 countries, regions, and institutions participated to share their policy directions and visions. And IEA launched the Global Hydrogen Review. And we will continue to work to deepen our international collaboration. So to wrap up, Japan is gearing up our policies, business models, and technology development to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And Japan is committed to accelerate technology development and building international supply chain on hydrogen. And as it plays an important role as a key innovation to reach the carbon neutral goal. And together with all partner countries, Japanese government is committed to provide support to strengthen our collaboration in the field of hydrogen even more and contribute to secure and sustainable energy future of Japan and the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deputy Director General Kihara, for that excellent presentation. I think the long-standing leadership of Japan on the issue of hydrogen is well known and unquestioned. But what I take great heart in is to know that it is also ongoing and accelerating. So that's really great news to hear. So moving swiftly on, it's my pleasure to introduce Darryl Wilson, the Executive Director of the Hydrogen Council, to counsel us very wisely on the issue of hydrogen. Darryl, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our host, Japan, and thank you to Jose and his team for an outstanding report, which he shared earlier. It's great to have a highly credible energy organization like the IEA loving hydrogen almost too much. I'm not sure I agree with Dr. Birol that that's possible, but too much love is not a bad thing. The Hydrogen Council now includes 130 of the industrial leaders around the world and has almost doubled in size in the last 2 years. So again, the sign of very substantial momentum in this sector. It's been my privilege to serve on the industrial side of hydrogen for the last 15 years, and truly I've never seen the level of interest and momentum that we witness today. But that causes us to say, is this real, and will it actually deliver? Because after all, today we're standing here at the COP conference, seriously concerned that urgent action is necessary. The problem for hydrogen today is not the lack of money. On our recent reporting, we're tracking 160 billion of planned industrial investment for hydrogen, and this will be complemented by more than 70 billion in public funding. We don't have a money problem. We don't have a policy and strategy problem either. 37 countries, as we've heard, have already committed and made plans and targets and intention to take action in this area. We don't have a lack of talk or discussion. Lots of talk and discussion here at the conference, including tonight. We don't need more talk, but we need concrete action. And in a few moments, I want to talk more about what stands in our way. But the stage is set with many of the ingredients in place for hydrogen to truly and finally take its place as a major contributor and solution to climate change. By our most recent reporting, just reported today, our estimate is that hydrogen will contribute 22% of final energy use by 2050. And during the journey between now and 2050, a very, very large amount, many, many gigatons of decarbonization contribution on the journey to that final goal of playing its full role, a fifth of the total solution. We don't say hydrogen is everything, but we do recognize that hydrogen has a huge part to play. But there are some practical things that stand in our way. We are not all acting yet. We are planning, intending, and strategizing, but not acting. And until the action happens, we're not solving the problem. So in just a moment, I'd like to make some further comments about what that action looks like so that we can indeed realize the promise and contribution of hydrogen. Thank you very much.
Wonderful remarks there, Darrell, and really great to hear the problems that we don't have as well, which is often not the case in a lot of places, so really good news, but also the recognition that it's the action that we really need to see accelerate on the ground. So we're now going to move to the virtual part of our panel. So I believe if we can get them back on the screen, we should be able to see Sunita and Noe, and I'm going to go to Noe first, if I may. So Noe, it's really great to have you here as the head of IPHE. Please, over to you for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Dan. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me all right? Yes?
Yep, very good, Noe. Great.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me from afar. Many thanks to IEA, but also, of course, Japan. And like others have said already, I really want to praise the global leadership of Japan on hydrogen. We are all benefiting from their great pioneering projects and their global leadership on international cooperation. Okay, so let me make quickly, because we know the time is limited, then 3 points. So my first is what, as a chair of IPHE, which is the oldest intergovernmental network on hydrogen on the planet, what do we see, what are we doing, and what's next? That's my kind of the division that I make. So number one is, what do we see? Like many others, we see incredible momentum. So according to what governments and our members report to us, we indeed see that more than 30 countries already have either strategies or roadmaps planning what they want to do about hydrogen. And they are positioning hydrogen, as many already have stressed, not as the silver bullet for slashing emissions, but as the missing link for the hard to abate or the hard to electrify sectors. So you're talking about industry, you're talking about heavy duty transportation, you're talking about medium and long-term energy storage. Those are three things that definitely almost everybody across the world is now focusing on. So that's one thing. You also see, like already mentioned by others, no lack of money. Even public funding, the public funding that governments report to us has more than 30 billion in dollars in total and counting. It's 10% already up from 6 months ago. So a lot of things are happening. But of course, as we heard from the IEA and the Global Hydrogen Review, despite the fact that a lot of things are happening, it's not enough. So even more needs to happen in the coming time. So what are the challenges? Cost, obviously, as has been mentioned, the cost must come down of clean hydrogen. Regulation, the rules of the game, as Fatih Birol called it, needs to be put in place, and we need to invest in infrastructure, because the demand for hydrogen, the demand centers are not necessarily in the same place where the supply sources are. So you need to connect demand and supply. Some countries are looking at repurposing gas pipelines, but of course also we already have been looking at, or we already heard about the trading that is happening. The first, global value chains that are being developed by Japan, by others. So we see an emerging market of net importers like Japan, Korea, the European Union, and net exporters like we heard from the Minister of Chile, but also Canada, Middle East. They might all be very good candidates for making that trade happen. Okay, so that's what we see happening, very much in line with what others have said. Now, what is the IPHE doing? We try to contribute very concrete things, Dan and dear audience. We are doing, number one, trying to develop a methodology, and we have launched the first proposal for that, of a standard how to calculate the carbon footprint of hydrogen production from different pathways, either from gas and CCUS or from renewable energy and some other pathways. Because that's kind of the first button of the shirt that Fatih Birol was talking about. The first button is we need to agree at the global scale, how do we calculate actually this carbon footprint of hydrogen production? So we hope that this might eventually become an ISO standard that we can all build on, the first button of our shirt when we talk about certification. That's number one. Number two, we have started to look in actually what are the trade rules when we talk about global trade in hydrogen? What kind of barriers might we tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers might we encounter on the road? How can we identify them? And if we have identified them, we need to find the right forum to tackle them. So those are kind of concrete things, Dan, except from, of course, monitoring what the governments are doing, our member countries are doing. So last but not least, what's next? We hope to be a partner with the IEA, with others, SEM, IRENA, that are already working on hydrogen, maximize the synergies of international cooperation, because we need much stronger international cooperation if we want to harvest the potential at the pace that we need according to the Global Hydrogen Review. So we hope to contribute to realizing that hydrogen breakthrough that Glasgow and the leaders have just agreed upon in Glasgow. Thank you very much.
Excellent remarks there, Noé. Thank you so much for those insights, but also for the great work that you and IPHE are doing. It's really great to hear about those concrete actions that you say that are being done and will be done. So without further ado, let me move quickly on to Dr. Sunita Satyapal. Sunita, it's great to see you. Thanks to you for joining us as well. Let me hand over to you for your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And a big thank you to Japan, to IEA, to really all of the organizers here. It's an honor to be here. And I will share my screen first, and hopefully you can see that okay. And I would also like to make just 3 quick points. First of all, set the context for the U.S. activities, and then talk about what are we doing in hydrogen, a brand new initiative I'd like to mention. And then third, next steps, what are we planning to do? So first of all, context, again, I think we all know that we rely heavily on fossil fuels. Many countries do. Last year, for the first time, renewables surpassed coal. This is U.S. energy consumption. But again, especially in transportation, those hard to decarbonize sectors, we still rely very heavily on petroleum and natural gas fossil fuels. So I think the first message really is that sense of urgency. So if we look at the administration's goals, they include net zero by 2050, completely clean grid by 2035. And then a third priority I really want to emphasize is what we call environmental justice or energy justice. So how do we impact those who've historically experienced environmental or energy injustice? So our Justice 40 initiative, 40% of our benefits disadvantaged communities. This is a very high priority. So hydrogen is one part of a very broad portfolio. And we have an initiative called H2 at Scale, depicted here. Again, the concept we can use all of our diverse domestic resources, so even fossil with CCS, addressing upstream emissions, nuclear, renewable, the grid, the natural gas infrastructure. Once we produce hydrogen, we can use it for multiple applications. That sector coupling concept, again, it's an enabler. And so our focus is those hard to decarbonize sectors, as we've heard, I think with all the roadmaps, industrial, chemical, heavy duty transport, energy storage. And from the U.S. perspective, we produce about 10 million metric tons of hydrogen. And we're seeing scenarios for even 5 times more hydrogen. And again, to put this in context, 10 million metric tons additional hydrogen in the U.S. would double today's solar or wind deployments in the U.S. So really, it's an enabler, allows that additional dispatchability, versatility, and huge opportunity for jobs, revenues. Again, I think consistent with all the other country plans. But the key is really we have to get costs down. And so going back to the climate summit in April, President Biden asked our Secretary of Energy, what more can we do to really speed the development of critical technologies? And that was the beginning of the Energy Earthshot initiative. So similar to the moonshots from over half a century ago with John F. Kennedy. These are bold, ambitious targets and initiatives, a concerted, coordinated effort really to the community. So the very first was the hydrogen energy Earthshot. So today, hydrogen is only about $1.50 in the US from natural gas. And again, to get to scale, to really be competitive in the long term, we're aiming for 111, an easily articulated goal target, $1 for 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen in 1 decade. And again, regardless of colors, really focusing on that clean, low carbon, or eventually zero carbon hydrogen. So in addition, finally, next steps, we're looking, in addition to the R&D, very strategically at how do we scale up. So we have renewables in the blue, the nuclear plants in the green, natural gas, of course, SMR, CCS. And so our priorities really are accelerate R&D, all hands on deck to reduce cost for clean hydrogen, as well as infrastructure. So de-risk some of those demonstrations, enable deployments, and then that really strategic scale up. As we've heard in other countries, co-locating, enabling that infrastructure and end use and off-takers. And then, of course, a lot of enabling activities such as workforce development, safety codes and standards, diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of these are very high priorities. So finally, thank you once again, and big congratulations. We're very involved in really all of these international partnerships. And we think that collaboration is really critical as we move forward. So on behalf of us at DOE, thank you again for all of the leadership and the efforts on hydrogen. Back to you, Dan.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sunita. That was really excellent. Look, I'm conscious of time. We've now got an opportunity to do a quick round of follow-up questions with our panelists. I'll ask all of the panelists, if I may, please try and keep your answers to under 2 minutes, if at all possible, and I'll try and keep things moving quickly as best I can. So thank you for all of those opening interventions. Now let me just follow up with you, DDG Kahara. Now, we've heard the tremendous momentum that is clearly building in the hydrogen space, and we all see it, and that is in no small part because of Japanese leadership over a long period of time. But how do you see your role and your leadership and your contribution contributing to the next phase in this hydrogen journey?
Yes, thank you for your question. There's two things. One is technology innovation, and two is building this supply chain, the global supply chain. On the technology innovation, we already have the technologies, and it's now time to really quickly move to demonstration stage plus commercialization stage. So Japan, we are working on this 2 trillion yen, this is $20 billion Green Innovation Fund. We support the development of these hydrogen projects. This is like 10 years project. We ask for commitment for realization, make it real. So we're working on these infrastructure technologies, process technologies, shipment technology, but we aim to implement it as quickly as possible. That's one thing. And the second thing is about building the global supply chain. As I showed the map, we're looking into the LNG model. In the 1960s, people thought we were crazy when the first Japanese power generator utility tried to import the first LNG from Alaska, minus 163 degrees stuff on a special tanker, very expensive. But I think that was a great decision by the CEO of the utility company. And that's what we see in this hydrogen. So this first shipment happening between Australia and Japan, we subsidize the ship of the first tanker, minus 253 degrees, much colder than LNG. But that's only one option. There's also for chemical substance. You can turn it, called metrocyclohexane. Also, you can ship by form of ammonia, NH3. You only need to have the H and not have the C. So there's many options. There's a competition among these shipping technologies. But we are looking into who's the fastest to reach the commercialization stage. So those are the two important priorities we are working on. Thank you.
Wonderful, Shinichi. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. And Daryl, over to you. So you told us about lots of things that are going well earlier, but you also gave us a little sneak preview of maybe some challenges or of the punchy things we need to see now. So over to you.
So action is practical, sequential, and requires local action. So let me take those very quickly. I'm very encouraged when I see the Ports Initiative out of the IEA and the Hydrogen Valleys Initiative out of the Clean Energy Ministerial, because this localizes the action. And some of the places we're making the best progress today is where there is focused local action. Secondly, action is practical. In the end, it's the hands and feet of industrial folks that make things happen. And that's a big, difficult job. And in many ways, we just need to hurry up and start doing the actual practical thing in taking action. And that's the point we haven't hit in many places. The stage is set, the actors are there, the money is there, but we haven't actually started. And so we need to just hurry up and start on the practicality of action. And then finally, action is sequential. Certain things have to be in place before you move to the next step. It's a step-by-step thing. When we gathered the CEOs early last month and talked about how we get all of this going, we heard from some of the largest venture capital funds and private equity funds and largest banks in the world saying the money's there. But that money will not move until it's ready to be coordinated with the public money, and the mechanisms for the money to come together for the public and private side is clear enough, so there's comfort enough that there's bankability and readiness to commit the funds from both sides. And we haven't hit that point in many, many places. So these issues around the practicality of action, the sequential nature of action, and the local nature of action, that's where we're stuck. I'm confident we're going to push through those things, but when I think about the sense of urgency today and how all of the lead times add up for these items, we need to hurry up and start.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Daryl. Very well put. Very, very clear statement there. And let me just move over to Noe again, back on our virtual stage. And maybe even Noe will have some or all of the answer to the challenge that Daryl's just raised. I mean, what from your deep experience in multiple roles working in the hydrogen economy space, Noe, what would you say you see as being the critical factor right now in terms of accelerating that scale up of low carbon hydrogen and accelerating that pace in the way that Daryl alluded to?
Yes, great question, Dan. Obviously, and I think there's a lot of talk also in COP now about carbon pricing. Carbon pricing definitely helpful. But it's, so I would certainly support that, but it's not going fast enough. So we need this strong action, I think, that Daryl is talking about. And I tend to agree with what Fatih Birol was saying, demand, demand, demand. We need to create a very clear and as large as possible clean hydrogen market in 2030, so that the investors, that the companies know this is going to be the market. How can we do that? Governments should not underestimate their role. They can, like, for instance, the Commission, the European Commission is proposing in Fit for 55, they can mandate so much of the current existing gray hydrogen market, the hydrogen from fossil fuels, should be decarbonized by 2030. And it's, you know, and it should be significant, obviously. That would be one thing. You could say, let's do a mandate for blending of hydrogen in the gas grid. You could say, you know, a certain percentage in aviation, in maritime, in shipping. So create that very clear visibility of what the market would be. And last but not least, you know, what the governments can do is the public procurement. Why don't cities, provinces, governments, you know, really sit down, as far as they have not done it yet, and say by 2030, the stuff that we buy, the vehicles that we buy, but also the new buildings that we purchase from the market, they need to be zero emission. You know, start pushing that boundary and start pushing the companies that, you know, we only want zero emission stuff by a certain date. I say 2030, but it should be not far off, so that we really create that very clear market. And last but not least, of course, taxation. Look at your taxation systems. It should be really focused on green stuff. It should punish the polluting stuff and favor the zero emission alternatives. Thank you.
Absolutely, Noe. Thank you so much. And you remind me that I heard a colleague recently saying we need three things: demand, demand, demand. And I think that very much echoes with the remarks that you were saying there. Sunita, let me come back to you. I know that there's currently a lot of provisions being discussed around potential proposed US legislation. Now, it's not passed yet, and so I know we have to talk about it in a very provisional nature. But I think for this audience, this global audience, they might be interested to hear from you, an expert in the topic in the US, a few examples of what we might see come out of those potential policies in the US related to hydrogen.
Great, thank you, Dan. And it is a very exciting time here in the US with some of these large infrastructure reconciliation bills in Congress. So hopefully they'll pass soon. And again, we've seen a lot of great examples from other countries. You know, a big congratulations to Japan as well. I think over the years, such close collaboration, seeing the examples, Europe, elsewhere as well. So we have the President's American Jobs Plan actually has specific mention of a hydrogen production tax credit. So that's a concrete example of a policy that will really help drive that, you know, manufacturing at scale. There's also a demonstration specifically also in industrial applications, disadvantaged communities, And then again, many different examples. We'll have to see what exactly gets passed, but provisions such as a clean hydrogen standard, a national strategy, hubs or clusters. So potential, again, very many numbers out there, but potentially, 8 billion has also been discussed. So I think for the first time we're seeing, a lot of momentum in the U.S. and, potential for hydrogen. But I do agree with Daryl. And again, this is a pretty close-knit community. I think we all known each other for decades, but it's not just about the strategies, but the action. And I think next is really that tactical plan, the producers, the off-takers, enabling that infrastructure. And I think getting that strategy and the tactical plan together is really critical before we just rush into movement. But I agree with all the comments everyone has made here. So thank you again. Back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sunita. And look, that brings us to the end of this panel discussion. So can I please ask for a round of applause for all of our excellent panelists? Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a really exciting event over the last hour and a half. Let me just try and wrap up very briefly. So look, as we've heard from all of our participants here today, the plans for hydrogen are ambitious and there is clearly more to come. There is indeed a lot of excellent news, as we've been hearing, due to the important role that hydrogen should play in the transition to a net zero energy system. The common discussion happening here at COP26 over these 2 weeks. Also, real common themes around the need to cut the carbon, cut the price, and increase the pace. And various ways that we can do that, national level, international level, to achieve those 3 goals. Now, as we've also heard, we really don't have a lot of time to lose if we want to make sure that the hydrogen technologies are scaled up at the required pace to play their role in the clean energy transition that they clearly have the potential and the need to do, particularly in the transition to net zero energy systems, as we're seeing more and more commitments to that goal around the world. But we have to take advantage of this other thing that we've heard a lot of today, momentum, the big mo, as they talk about in sporting circles. Make sure that we take advantage of that momentum behind hydrogen to accelerate the scale up now and the adoption during this decade, not just about the promise for the future. And as we've heard, international cooperation is critical, a topic very dear to my heart as the head of the Clean Energy Ministerial and as a proud bastion of the Clean Energy Ministerial's own hydrogen initiative. And I'm very grateful to all of the participants here today for playing a key role in that element of international collaboration as well. Look, we're already seeing great ambition and real concrete commitments being brought here to this critical COP26 meeting. And I'm sure we all hope that that continues. We also hope that this spurs an ambitious phase of clean energy and an ambitious new clean hydrogen economy around the world. With that, I just want to say thank you to everyone once again. Thank you to our host, the Government of Japan, in this wonderful pavilion setting, and to our technical team for doing a great job for everyone both here physically and for those here virtually. Thank you very much.